Algeria has known many empires and dynasties, including the ancient Numidians, 3rd century BC, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Romans, Vandals, Byzantines, over a dozen different Arab and Amazigh dynasties, Spaniards, and Ottoman Turks. Under the Turks, the Barbary pirates operated from North Africa and preyed on shipping, from about 1500 until the French captured Algiers in 1830. The French southward conquest of Algeria proceeded throughout the 19th century and was marked by many atrocities. A bloody 8-year struggle culminated in Algerian independence in 1962. Algeria's long dominant political party, the National Liberation Front, FLN, was established in 1954 as part of the struggle for independence and has since played a large role in politics, though it is falling out of favor with the youth and current president Abdelmajid Tebboune. The government of Algeria in 1988 instituted a multi-party system in response to public unrest, but the surprising first-round success of the Islamic Salvation Front, FIS, in the 1991 legislative election led the Algerian military to intervene and postpone the second round of elections to prevent what the secular elite feared would be an extremist-led government from assuming power. An army crackdown on the FIS escalated into an FIS insurgency and intense violence from 1992 to 98 that resulted in over 100,000 deaths, many of which were attributed to extremist groups massacring villagers. The government gained the upper hand by the late 1990s, and FIS's armed wing, the Islamic Salvation Army, disbanded in 2000. FIS membership is now illegal. In 1999, Abdelaziz Bouteflika won the presidency with the backing of the military, in an election that was boycotted by several candidates protesting alleged fraud. He won subsequent elections in 2004, 2009, and 2014. Widespread protests against his decision to seek a fifth term broke out in early 2019. Bouteflika resigned in April 2019, and in December 2019, Algerians elected former Prime Minister Abdelmajid Tebboune as the country's new president. A longtime FLN member, Tebboune ran for president as an independent. In 2020, Algeria held a constitutional referendum on governmental reforms, which Tebboune enacted in 2021. Subsequent reforms to the national electoral law introduced open-list voting to curb corruption. The new law also eliminated gender quotas in parliament, and the 2021 legislative elections saw female representation plummet. The referendum, parliamentary elections, and local elections saw record low voter turnout. Algeria, large, predominantly Muslim country of North Africa. From the Mediterranean coast, along which most of its people live, Algeria extends southward deep into the heart of the Sahara, a forbidding desert where Earth's hottest surface temperatures have been recorded and which constitutes more than 4/5 of the country's area. The Sahara and its extreme climate dominate the country. The contemporary Algerian novelist Isha Jabar has highlighted the environs, calling her country a dream of sand. History, language, customs, and an Islamic heritage make Algeria an integral part of the Maghreb and the larger Arab world, but the country also has a sizable Amazigh, Berber, population, with links to that cultural tradition. Once the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, the territory now comprising Algeria was ruled by various Arab Amazigh dynasties from the 8th through the 16th century, when it became part of the Ottoman Empire. The decline of the Ottomans was followed by a brief period of independence that ended when France launched a war of conquest in 1830. Negotiations ended the conflict and led to Algerian independence, and most Europeans left the country. Although the influence of the French language and culture in Algeria remains strong, since independence the country consistently has sought to regain its Arab and Islamic heritage. At the same time, the development of oil and natural gas and other mineral deposits in the Algerian interior brought new wealth to the country and prompted a modest rise in the standard of living. In the early 21st century, Algeria's economy was among the largest in Africa. The capital is Algiers, a crowded bustling seaside metropolis whose historic core, or Medina, is ringed by tall skyscrapers and apartment blocks. Algeria's second city is Oran, a port on the Mediterranean Sea near the border with Morocco. Less hectic than Algiers, Oran has emerged as an important center of music, art, and education. Algeria is bounded to the east by Tunisia and Libya, to the south by Niger, Mali, and Mauritania, to the west by Morocco and Western Sahara, which has been virtually incorporated by the former, and to the north by the Mediterranean Sea. It is a vast country, the largest in Africa and the 10th largest in the world, that may be divided into two distinct geographic regions. The northernmost, generally known as the Tell, is subject to the moderating influences of the Mediterranean and consists largely of the Atlas Mountains, which separate the coastal plains from the second region in the south. This southern region, almost entirely desert, forms the majority of the country's territory and is situated in the western portion of the Sahara, which stretches across North Africa. The main structural relief features in Algeria were produced by the collision of the African and Eurasian tectonic plates along the Mediterranean margin, giving the country its two geographic regions. The Tell, home to most of the country's population, contains two geologically young massifs, the Tell Atlas, Atlas Tellien, and the Saharan Atlas, Atlas Saharian, that run generally parallel from east to west and are separated by the high plateau, Hauts Plateaus. The south, consisting of the Sahara, is a solid and ancient platform of basement rock, horizontal and uniform. This region is uninhabited desert with the exception of several oases, but it conceals rich mineral resources, most significantly petroleum and natural gas. Arabic became the official national language of Algeria in 1990, and most Algerians speak one of several dialects of vernacular Arabic. These are generally similar to dialects spoken in adjacent areas of Morocco and Tunisia. Modern Standard Arabic is taught in schools. The Amazigh language, Tamazight, in several geographic dialects is spoken by Algeria's ethnic Amazighan, though most are also bilingual in Arabic. Algeria's official policy of Arabization since independence, which aims to promote indigenous Arabic and Islamic cultural values throughout society, has resulted in the replacement of French by Arabic as the national medium and, in particular, as the primary language of instruction in primary and secondary schools. Some Amazigh groups have strongly resisted this policy, fearing domination by the Arabic-speaking majority. The Amazigh language was granted the status of a national language in 2002 and was upgraded to an official language in 2016. Most Algerians, both Arab and Amazigh, are Sunni Muslims of the Maliki rite. A source of unity and cultural identity, Islam provides valuable links with the wider Islamic world as well. In the struggle against French rule, Islam became an integral part of Algerian nationalism. Algeria's economy is dominated by its export trade in petroleum and natural gas, commodities that, despite fluctuations in world prices, annually contribute roughly one-third of the country's gross domestic product, GDP. Until 1962, the economy was based largely on agriculture and complemented France's economy. Since then, the extraction and production of hydrocarbons have been the most important activity and have facilitated rapid industrialization. The Algerian government instituted a centrally planned economy within a state socialist system in the first 2 decades after independence, nationalizing major industries and implementing multi-year economic plans. However, since the early 1980s the focus has shifted toward privatization, and Algeria's socialist direction has been modified somewhat. Standards of living have risen to those of an intermediately developed country, but food production has fallen well below the level of self-sufficiency. Cultivated land is largely restricted to the coastal plains and valleys. These areas were colonized by French settlers, who established vineyards, orchards, citrus groves, and market gardens. The best farms were located in the well-watered fertile plains around Béjaïa and Annaba in the east, in the Mitidja plain south of Algiers, and beyond Oran from Sidi Bel Abbès to Tlemcen. Rich vineyard areas were also maintained on the Media and Mascara plateaus. The country's aridity, however, renders more than 4/5 of the land uncultivable, and most of the remaining agricultural land is suitable only for pasture. The rest is tilled or devoted to vineyards and orchards. Winter grains wheat, barley, and oats are grown on the largest area of arable land in the drier high plateau, notably around Constantine, and in the Sursu Plateau to the west. Also in the west, esparto grass grows naturally on the region's steppe plains. Tobacco, olives, and dates are important crops, as are sorghum, millet, corn, maize, rye, and rice. The climate is not well suited to extensive stock raising, but there are many scattered herds of cattle, goats, and sheep, and stock raising contributes significantly to the traditional sector of agriculture. Irregular precipitation has long been a threat to agriculture, but dam construction and irrigation projects have added some stability to crop production. At independence, Algeria possessed some 20 sizable dams. An active and ongoing construction program nearly doubled that number by the late 1980s, adding substantially to the country's total irrigated acreage. Despite such efforts, the nation's meager water resources are under increasing pressure to meet its urban industrial demands as well. Since independence, agriculture has been the neglected sector of Algeria's economy, suffering from underinvestment, poor organization, and successive restructuring. It now contributes less than 1/10 of GDP annually. As a result, cereal production has undergone large annual fluctuations, orchard and industrial crops have largely stagnated, and viticulture has declined markedly. Wine production, once the mainstay of colonial agriculture and exports, is now at only about 1/10 of its 1950s levels. Because of Islam's ban on alcohol consumption, viticulture is increasingly deemed culturally inappropriate. Wine exports to France have substantially declined, and most vineyards have been uprooted, with considerable loss of employment. Only market gardening and livestock production have shown significant growth. As a result, Algeria changed from a food exporting nation in the 1950s to one that by the late 20th century had to import about 3/4 of its food needs. In addition, the program to privatize former state farms since the 1980s caused legal wrangling over land ownership. A substantial area of fertile agricultural land in and around Algiers and Oran has gone out of production because of the civil strife in the country that began in the early 1990s. Algeria's scant forests have relegated only minor importance to timber production in the country's economy, although some cork from the cork oak forests in the higher elevations of the Tel Atlas is processed domestically. Forest area has decreased rapidly since the 1950s through logging operations, forest fires, and urban encroachment, adding to the country's serious problem of soil erosion. However, the Algerian government aims at preserving and expanding the remaining woodlands. Even with the country's long coastline, the fishing industry is underdeveloped and lands only a portion of its estimated potential catch. Refrigeration and canning facilities, necessary for transporting the catch inland, are limited. The government, however, has taken steps to develop the industry by constructing additional fishing ports. Extensive deposits of sulfur-free light crude oil were discovered in the Algerian Sahara in the mid-1950s. Production began in 1958, concentrated in 3 main fields: Hassi Messaoud, in the northeastern part of the Sahara, Zarzate Nejali, along the Libyan border, and El Bourma, on the Tunisian border. Deposits of natural gas were first discovered at Hassi Armel in 1956, and since then discoveries have also been made at several other fields. Algeria ranks among the top countries in the world in terms of total gas reserves and gas exports. The gas has a methane content of more than 80% and also contains ethane, propane, and helium. 4 pipelines transport petroleum from Algeria's oil fields to Mediterranean ports for export overseas by ship. 3 submarine pipelines transport natural gas across the Mediterranean to Europe. The Trans-Mediterranean natural gas pipeline from Tunisia to Sicily and on to Naples, Italy, was completed in 1981, substantially boosting the sales of Algerian natural gas to Europe. In 1996, a second Maghreb-Europe gas pipeline began to supply Spain with Algerian gas through Morocco, and Portugal was linked to the system in 1997, The pipeline was closed in late 2021 when a diplomatic dispute led Algeria to sever ties with Morocco. Medgaz, a direct natural gas pipeline from Algeria to Spain, began operating in 2011. With petroleum reserves expected to run out in the first half of the 21st century, exports of natural gas hold the promise of being more important for the economy than sales of oil. The main mining centers are at Ouanza and Jebel Ankh near the eastern border with Tunisia and at El Abed in the west. Extensive deposits of high-grade iron ore are worked at Ouanza, and major deposits of medium-grade ore exist at Garajabilat near Tindouf. Nearly all the high-grade iron ore from the open-cut works at Ouanza is used to supply the domestic steel industry. The manufacturing sector was mainly confined to food processing, textiles, cigarettes, and clothing before independence. Since 1967, however, the main emphasis has shifted toward heavy industry. The State Steel Corporation, for example, completed its large El Hajar steelworks complex at Annaba in the early 1970s and has constructed a zinc electrolysis plant near the El Abed mine, at Gazaouet. Much of the steel produced for domestic consumption is allocated for machine tools, tractors, agricultural equipment, buses, trucks, and automobiles. Paralleling the Annaba steel complex is the vast Skikda petrochemical works, which includes a gas liquefaction plant, an ethylene factory, liquid petroleum gas separation facilities, a plastics factory, and a benzene refinery. Other gas liquefaction plants are located at Bijaya and Arzew. The latter is also the site of a nitrogenous fertilizer factory, an oil refinery, and a liquid petroleum gas separation plant. A complex at Setif houses methanol and plastics factories. The phosphate fertilizer factory at Annaba is a major component of Algeria's heavy industrial development. A large proportion of the country's industries were state-run until the 1980s, when the government restructured these large operations into smaller state-run units and encouraged these to pursue joint ventures with private concerns. Algeria was unable to use its full industrial capacity at that time, however, because its financial situation had deteriorated and the economy remained poorly managed. Nonetheless, the state continued to encourage private industry, and in the early 1990s a privately owned steel mill began operation. Joint ventures between Algerian and foreign companies have been promoted at a growing rate, especially in the field of petrochemicals. Agreements were also made with European countries to set up automobile assembly and engine production industries, and South Korean firms have become more involved in various endeavors, notably the manufacture of electrical goods, fertilizers, and automobiles. Within Algerian-owned industries, continued restructuring during the 1990s resulted in many factory shutdowns and job losses, and production levels varied from year to year. Finance. The Banque d'Algérie, an independent central bank established in 1963, issues the Algerian dinar, the national currency. The government restructured the commercial banking system in the mid-1980s, increasing the number of state-owned commercial banks in the country. The state also opened the financial market to private banks, including some foreign ones, in the 1990s. A law enacted in 1995 lifted government price controls on a variety of commodities. Price subsidies on various basic products have been gradually phased out, in line with Algeria's restructuring agreements with the International Monetary Fund. These agreements also resulted in the floating and subsequent devaluation of the dinar, which had formerly been artificially tied to the French franc. Trade. Virtually all of Algeria's foreign exchange earnings are derived from the export of petroleum and natural gas products, both of which are refined domestically at an increasing rate. Other exports include phosphates, vegetables, dates, tobacco, and leather goods. The major imports are capital goods and semi-finished products, consisting mostly of industrial equipment and consumer goods, followed closely by foodstuffs. About two-thirds of all trade is with countries of the European Union, and the United States is next in importance. Algerian trade with France dropped from 4/5 of the total trade in 1961 to about 1/10 in the early 21st century. French imports of Algerian agricultural products, especially wine, were severely restricted after independence. Algerians in France remit substantial sums of money annually to relatives in Algeria. This is partly responsible for Algeria's healthy balance of payments position. Services. The service sector contributes a relatively small amount to the country's GDP and employs only a small proportion of the labor force. Tourist-related activities have traditionally made up only a minute part of the service sector. This, despite Algeria's many striking natural features and significant historical wealth, and even this share declined beginning in the 1990s because of civil unrest. Labor and taxation. The right for labor to organize is guaranteed by Algerian law, although there is only one nationwide trade union, Union Générale des Travailleurs Algériens, which is also the country's largest labor organization. The government guarantees a minimum wage, and the work week is set at 40 hours and, as in many Muslim countries, extends from Saturday to Wednesday. The largest employment sectors in Algeria are public administration, agriculture, and transportation. Unemployment, however, is high by any standard, with nearly one-third of the eligible labor force out of work. Proceeds from the sale of petroleum and natural gas are far and away the government's largest source of revenue. Despite fluctuations in the world oil market, this sector provides more than half the government's annual receipts, with other sources such as tax revenue, customs duties, and fees generating the balance. Of these latter sources, taxes, both income and value added, constitute the largest proportion. At independence, Algeria inherited a transportation network geared towards serving French colonial interests. The network did not integrate the country nationally or regionally, and few north-south routes existed. However, a good road network was in place in the densely populated Tel region, complete with express highways around the city of Algiers. Fast and frequent rail service was established between Oran, Algiers, and Constantine by the late 20th century. The main rail line parallels the coast and extends from the Moroccan to the Tunisian border. Several standard gauge lines branch from the main line to port cities and to some interior towns, and a few narrow gauge lines cross the high plateau to the Algerian Sahara. 2 trans-Saharan roads have been built, one paved route from El Gholia to Tamanghasset and then south to Niger, the other from El Gholia to Adrar and then on to Mali. A state bus company and several private companies provide reliable intercity bus services. In 2011, the country's first subway line was opened in Algiers. At its inauguration, it spanned 5.5 miles, 9 kilometers, and had 10 stations. The principal ports are Algiers, Oran, Annaba, Bijia, Betchoua, Mostaganem, and Tens, in addition to the primarily petroleum and natural gas ports at Arzew and Skikda. Algeria's merchant fleet has grown into a major world shipping line. Administered by the Algerian National Navigation Company, the fleet includes more than 150 vessels, including oil tankers and specialized liquefied natural gas tankers. Air Algerie, the state airline, operates flights to many foreign countries and provides daily domestic flights between the country's major cities and towns. There are international airports at Algiers, Annaba, Constantine, Oran, Tlemcen, and Gardia. The Algerian government began investing heavily in the country's telecommunications infrastructure in the 1970s and 80s, and, beginning in the early 1990s, the Ministry of Posts and Telecommunications, MPT, the sector's controlling body, began to slowly deregulate what had been a complete government monopoly. In 2000, a series of laws opened up the market even further, including allowing foreign companies to tender bids, and Algerie Telecom, a state-owned telecommunications company distinct from MPT, was founded. A separate regulatory body was formed to organize the free market system. Despite intensive investment in Algeria's telecommunications infrastructure, telephone, mobile telephone, and internet access is still limited. Few Algerians can afford the luxury of a home computer, and cable and telephone access has limited the number of internet subscribers. Consequently, cybercafes are popular among those seeking internet access. Although its yearly military expenditures are well above the world average, Algeria maintains a relatively small active military. More than half of its troop strength consists of conscripts who serve for 6 months, with an additional year of civic service. Most conscripts serve in the army. Algeria has only a small air force and navy. The former has relatively few high-performance aircraft, and the navy consists largely of coastal patrol craft. Paramilitary and police forces outnumber the active-duty military by a substantial margin, and years of civil unrest have forced the government to rely on such forces divided among several ministries and directorates both for internal security and, often, for quelling internal dissent. Because of the country's relatively young population and pressing medical needs, the healthcare system is oriented toward preventive medicine rather than treatment. Instead of building expensive hospitals, Algeria emphasizes smaller clinics and health centers and maintains a comprehensive vaccination program. Medical care, including medication, is provided by the state without charge, although those earning middle and higher incomes pay a part of their medical fees on a proportional scale. There is an increasing trend toward private healthcare. In an effort to extend healthcare to everyone, the government requires all newly qualified physicians, dentists, and pharmacists to work in public health for at least 5 years. Most medical personnel and facilities, however, remain concentrated in the north, especially in the large cities. Remote mountain locations and much of the Sahara are nearly devoid of modern facilities. Tuberculosis, hepatitis, measles, typhoid fever, cholera, and dysentery are the principal health problems, often brought about by inadequate sanitation facilities and a lack of safe drinking water. Algeria's chronic housing shortage contributed to health problems throughout much of the latter half of the 20th century. Continuous rural-urban migration and unchecked population growth allowed urban shanty towns to proliferate. The government, whose spending priorities had been focused largely on heavy industry since independence, did little to relieve the housing shortage until the mid-1980s. At that time, however, development plans began emphasizing investment in social infrastructure and services. More construction of affordable government-subsidized housing units has since taken place, including a large prefabricated housing construction program to tackle the most urgent housing needs. The growth of more than 100,000 new households each year placed a considerable strain on existing housing conditions. A sharp drop in oil prices in 1986 and the inability to meet the mounting needs for new housing led the Algerian government to withdraw from some of its commitments and encourage local and private housing initiatives. Foreign companies, including some from the now defunct Yugoslavia, were increasingly granted large construction contracts. Algeria also benefited from soft loans throughout the 1990s from the World Bank, the European Union, and other Arab countries to promote its construction sector. State companies were privatized, and joint ventures with European and American companies finally began to address some of the country's housing needs. Since independence, Algerian authorities have worked on redesigning the national educational system. Particular attention has been given to replacing French with Arabic as the language of instruction and to emphasizing scientific and technical studies. Education in Arabic is officially compulsory for all children between 6 and 15 years of age, and roughly 9/10 of boys of that age are in school. Enrollment for girls is slightly lower. Children residing in rural areas have remained underrepresented in the classroom, although much progress for both groups has been made since independence. The literacy rate is about 3/4 for men but less than half for women. The educational system has experienced extreme difficulty in trying to accommodate the increasing number of school-age children. The scarcity of qualified Arabic teachers has been ameliorated by the recruitment of teachers from other Arab countries. Arabic replaced French as the language of instruction at all institutes of higher learning in 2000. A Mzab discontent over the policy of Arabization, however, has prompted the government to restore a Mzab language and literature studies at a number of universities. The major institutions include Islamic universities in Algiers and Constantine, several regional university centers, and a number of technical colleges. Each year a few thousand Algerian students go abroad to study, mainly in France, other European countries, or the United States. Algerian culture and society were profoundly affected by 130 years of colonial rule, by the bitter independence struggle, and by the subsequent broad mobilization policies of post-independence regimes. A transient, nearly rootless society has emerged, whose cultural continuity has been deeply undermined. Seemingly, only deep religious faith and belief in the nation's populist ideology have prevented complete social disintegration. There has been a contradiction, however, between the government's various populist policies which have called for the radical modernization of society as well as the cultivation of the country's Arab Islamic heritage and traditional family structure. Although Algeria's cities have become centers for this cultural confrontation, even remote areas of the countryside have seen the state take on roles traditionally filled by the extended family or clan. Algerians have thus been caught between a tradition that no longer commands their total loyalty and a modernism that is attractive yet fails to satisfy their psychological and spiritual needs. Only the more isolated Amazigh groups, such as the Saharan Mzabites and Tuareg, have managed to some degree to escape these conflicting pressures. As is true elsewhere in North Africa, Algeria has experienced a dislocating clash between traditional and mass global culture, with Hollywood films and Western popular music commanding the attention of the young at the expense of indigenous forms of artistic and cultural expression. This clash is the subject of much fiery commentary from conservative Muslim clergymen, whose influence has grown with the rise of Islamic extremism. Extremists have opposed secular values in art and culture and have targeted prominent Algerian authors, playwrights, musicians, and artists including the director of the National Museum, who was assassinated in 1995, novelist Tahar Jaout, who was murdered in 1993, and the well-known Amazigh musician Laoune Matoub, who was assassinated in 1998. As a result, much of the country's cultural elite has left the country to work abroad, mostly in France. Despite efforts to modernize Algerian society, the pull of traditional values remains strong. Whether in the city or countryside, the daily life of the average Algerian is permeated with the atmosphere of Islam, which has become identified with the concept of an autonomous Algerian people and of resistance to what many Algerians perceive as a continued Western imperialism. Practiced largely as a set of social prescriptions and ethical attitudes, Islam in Algeria has more characteristically been identified with supporting traditional values than serving a revolutionary ideology. In particular, the influential Muslim clergy has opposed the emancipation of women. Algerians traditionally consider the family headed by the husband to be the basic unit of society, and women are expected to be obedient and provide support to their husbands. As in most parts of the Arab world, men and women in Algeria generally have constituted two separate societies, each with its own attitudes and values. Daily activities and social interaction normally take place only between members of the same gender. Marriage in this milieu is generally considered a family affair rather than a matter of personal preference, and parents typically arrange marriages for their children, although this custom is declining as Algerian women take on a greater role in political and economic life. Some women continue to wear veils in public because traditionally minded Algerian Muslims consider it improper for a woman to be seen by men to whom she is not related. The practice of veiling has in fact increased since independence, especially in urban areas, where there is a greater chance of contact with non-relatives. Algerian cuisine, like that of most North African countries, is heavily influenced by Arab, Amazigh, Turkish, and French culinary traditions. Couscous, a semolina-based pasta customarily served with a meat and vegetable stew, is the traditional staple. Although Western-style dishes, such as pizza and other fast foods, are popular and Algeria imports large quantities of foodstuffs, traditional products of Algerian agriculture remain the country's best liked. Mutton, lamb, and poultry are still the meat dishes of choice. Favorite desserts rely heavily on native-grown figs, dates, and almonds and locally produced honey, and couscous and unleavened breads accompany virtually every meal. Brique, a meat pastry, merguez, beef or lamb sausage, and lamb or chicken stew are among the many local dishes served in homes and restaurants. As is the case in the Middle East, strong, sweet Turkish-style coffee is the beverage of choice at social gatherings, and mint tea is a favorite. Algeria observes several religious and secular holidays, including the important Islamic festivals and commemorations such as Ramadan, the 2 festivals, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, and Mawlid, the Prophet's birthday, as well as national holidays such as Independence Day, July 5th. Various types of music are native to Algeria. One of the most popular, originating in the western part of the country, is Rai, from Arabic ray, meaning opinion or view, which combines varying instrumentation with simple poetic lyrics. Both men and women are free to express themselves in this style. One especially popular Algerian singer of Rai, Khalid, has exported this music to Europe and the United States, but he and other popular musicians such as Chaib Mami have been targets of Islamic extremists. Warani, the music of Oran, another style, blends Rai with classical Algerian music of the Arab Andalusian tradition. Algeria has produced many important writers. Some, such as the Nobel Prize winner Albert Camus and his contemporary Jean Sénac, were French, although their work was influenced by the many years they spent in Algeria. The writing of Henri Krier reflects the two worlds he inhabited as the son of a French father and an Algerian mother. Abd al-Hamid ben Hadouga is the father of modern Arabic literature in Algeria, while Jean Amrouche is considered the foremost poet of the first generation of North African writers who wrote in French. His younger sister Marguerite Tous Amrouche was a noted singer and writer. The work of Moulad Ferrun reflects a Mazai life. Mohammed Dib, Malek Haddad, Tahar Jayout, Murad Bourboun, Rachid Boudjedra, and Asha Jabar have all written about contemporary life in Algeria, with Jabar reflecting on this from a woman's perspective. Algeria has maintained a lively film industry, although filmmakers frequently have endured bouts with government pressure and, more recently, have been subjected to intimidation by Islamic extremists. The first major post-colonial production was the celebrated film La Battaglia d'Algérie, 1966, The Battle of Algiers. Though written and directed by an Italian, Guillaume Pontecorvo, the work, a stark factual retelling of urban warfare during the revolution, was supported by the Algerian government and was cast with numerous non-actors, including many residents of Algiers who participated in the actual events. The following year Mohamed Lakhdar Hamina directed Ar Alaris, 1966, The Winds of the Ours, the first work by an Algerian to win international acclaim. His Chronique d'Années de Braise, 1975, Chronicle of the Year of Embers, another gritty tale of the revolution, was awarded the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival nearly a decade later. Several films by the celebrated director Mirzakhal Wash, including Omar Gatleto, 1976, and Bab el-Wad Alama, 1994, Bab el-Oued City, which deal with the complexity of daily life in urban Algeria, have received international recognition. Additionally, director Bourlam Gurtjo examined the difficulties of the Algerian diaspora in France in his award-winning Vivre au Paradis, 1997, Living in Paradise. Algeria has a number of fine museums, most of which are located in the capital and are administered by the Office of Cultural Heritage, 1901. The National Museum of Antiquities, 1897, displays artifacts dating from the Roman and Islamic periods. The National Fine Arts Museum of Algiers, 1930, houses statues and paintings, including some lesser works of well-known European masters, and the Bardo Museum, 1930, specializes in history and ethnography. Most other cultural institutions also are found in Algiers, including the National Archives of Algeria, 1971, the National Library, 1835, and the Algerian Historical Society, 1963. Algerians enjoy football, soccer, handball, volleyball, and athletics. Algerian athletes have participated in the Olympic Games since 1964. They have won medals in boxing, but their major success has been in the area of middle distance running, especially the 1,500-meter event, which Algerian runners have won several times. Despite pressure from the government and threats and intimidation by Islamic militants, Algeria has one of the most vigorous presses in the Arab world. Daily newspapers are published in both Arabic and French in Algiers, Oran, and Constantine. Several weeklies and a host of magazines are also published in the country. The number and range of newspapers increased during the 1990s, despite frequent violent attacks directed against journalists by Islamic extremists. Radiodiffusion Television Algerian operates as a broadcasting institution under the Ministry of Information and Culture. Its 3 radio channels offer programming in Arabic, Kabyle, and, on its international channel, a mixture of French, English, and Spanish. The television network with 2 channels transmits to most of the country. The number of satellite dishes has increased, and many Algerians are now able to receive European stations. End to the civil war and amnesty for peace. Bouteflika vowed to work with other political parties. Violence ensued, however, and the number of killed, missing, and injured continued to rise. From the mid-1990s several discussions had been held between the government and AMS, the FIS, the GIA, and the ACE, among other parties, in order to clear up differences between the groups. In spite of a 1999 peace initiative, at the outset of the 21st century the situation remained unresolved, and violence continued. By that time, the civil war, which had begun in 1992, had claimed the lives of some 100,000 civilians and numerous political figures. In 2004 Bouteflika was re-elected by an overwhelming margin. The election was considered by international observers to be generally free from manipulation. The following year Bouteflika put forth the Charter for Peace and National Reconciliation, which was endorsed by referendum in late September. In February 2006 a presidential decree concerning its implementation was approved by the Council of Ministers. Among those measures were compensation for the families of the disappeared, an amnesty for state security forces and militias, and restraints on debate and criticism of those forces' conduct during the armed conflict. Islamist groups that surrendered voluntarily would be pardoned, along with those already held or sought so long as none were implicated in massacres, rapes, or bombings. The measures were opposed not only by victims' families but also by a number of international human rights groups, which jointly stated that the provisions denied justice to victims and their families and violated international law. Although a number of militants took the amnesty as an opportunity to resign their weapons, it was estimated that some 800 militants remained in operation following its expiration in late August. Many of the remaining militants belonged to an offshoot of the GIA known as the Salafist Group for Preaching and Combat, Group Salafist pour la Prédication et Combat, GSPC. The group continued to carry out bombings. In early 2007 it renamed itself Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, to emphasize its ties to the global jihadist movement led by Osama bin Laden. AQIM staged several high-profile suicide attacks in Algiers over the course of the year. By mid-2008, however, Algerian security forces' aggressive response had forced the group to shift its activities to the Sahel region, expanding into Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. Opposition, reform, and continued corruption. Bouteflika's third term and the Arab Spring protests of 2011. In November 2008 the Algerian parliament approved a constitutional amendment abolishing presidential term limits. The arrangement permitted Bouteflika the opportunity to run for his third consecutive term, which he easily won in April 2009. Protests broke out in January 2011 as young Algerians took to the streets to demonstrate against rising food prices, unemployment, and political repression. The protests in Algeria coincided with a wave of mass demonstrations that swept the Middle East and North Africa in early 2011, forcing Tunisian press, Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali and Egyptian press, Hosni Mubarak from power. As the demonstrators' calls for Bouteflika to step down intensified, officials argued that the protests were the work of a small minority and not the start of a popular uprising. Even so, officials seemed to offer a concession to the protesters, vowing to lift Algeria's state of emergency, in place since 1992. On February 24 the state of emergency was officially lifted. Unlike its Tunisian and Egyptian counterparts, the Algerian government withstood the surge of protest in early 2011 and then quickly took action to manage popular discontent. Oil and gas profits were used to fund substantial increases in domestic spending in 2011 and 2012. These increases included new subsidies for food and basic goods, pay raises for government workers, and new investment in housing and public works. Although Bouteflika announced an initiative for sweeping constitutional amendments in April, progress was slow and signs of meaningful political reform remained elusive. Prior to legislative elections in 2012, the government eased restrictions on the media, enacted changes to the electoral law, and legalized new political parties. However, these policies were instituted without public deliberation. The elections in 2012 did little to alter the political status quo. Bouteflika and the FLN remained dominant. On January 16, 2013, militants stormed a natural gas plant near the town of Aminas in southeastern Algeria, taking Algerian and foreign workers at the site hostage. An Algerian security guard and 38 foreign workers were killed before Algerian special forces retook the complex in a raid the following day. Bouteflika's fourth term, though he had suffered a stroke. Bouteflika easily won a fourth term as president, receiving more than 81% of the vote in April 2014, despite having rarely appeared in public to govern or campaign since suffering a debilitating stroke in April of the previous year. Several of his opponents denounced the election results as fraudulent, and it was unclear whether Bouteflika was actually making decisions himself or if others were making decisions in his name. Nonetheless, Bouteflika's fourth term saw a number of structural reforms meant to strengthen the presidency against the influence of the military elite. The Department of Intelligence and Security, Département du Renseignement et de la Sécurité, DRS, which was largely thought to function as a state within a state, was gradually sidelined through retiring its generals and reassigning certain DRS functions to other government agencies. In January 2016 the DRS was abolished and replaced by an agency directly under the control of the presidency. In February 2016 a package of constitutional amendments originally promised during the unrest of early 2011 was finally enacted. It included measures reinstating term limits for the presidency and requiring the president to appoint a prime minister from the majority party in the parliament. Notably, the package adopted Amazigh as an official language. Critics complained, however, that amendments had been written without sufficient input from the public or the political opposition and that they were unlikely to be implemented in a way that would alter the political status quo. Since independence, Algeria's foreign policy has been revolutionary in word but pragmatic in deed. The country was a haven for Third World guerrilla and revolutionary movements in its early years, and, while some militancy persists, Benjedid and subsequent leaders have moved away from that stance. Throughout the 1960s and 70s Algeria supported North Vietnam, and from 1975 it supported Vietnam, decolonization in Africa, and the abolition of apartheid in South Africa. The question of Palestine remained a central preoccupation, equal after 1975 with the Western Sahara issue. Yet, while Algeria continued to support the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, it also took a decisive role in mediating the release of U.S. hostages in Iran in 1981. Throughout the Cold War, Algeria sought to play the leading role in establishing a Third World alternative that was not aligned to the Eastern or Western Bloc. The country also tried to obtain high prices for its petroleum within the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which it joined in 1969, but more often found itself at odds with other members. Relations with neighboring Morocco have often been strained. A short border war that broke out in the fall of 1963, the area in dispute being rich in deposits of iron ore, was resolved through the intervention of the Organization of African Unity. A rapprochement achieved in 1969-70 broke down over Morocco's efforts to absorb Western Sahara, formerly Spanish Sahara, as Algeria supported the Popular Front for the Liberation of Sagia El Hamra and Rio de Oro, Polisario Front, in resisting Morocco. The strained relations, which kept the two countries on the brink of an all-out war, were connected in part to the somewhat revolutionary leanings of Boumediene and his antipathy for the Moroccan monarchy. Support for the Polisario Front continued under Benjedid, but problems between the two countries gradually eased. Benjedid and King Hassan II of Morocco met to discuss a possible resolution for the Western Sahara issue in May 1987, and diplomatic relations were restored the following year. Friction re-emerged, however, notably in 1993 when Hassan stated that it would have been better if the FIS had been allowed to gain power in Algeria. Tensions over Western Sahara intensified in the mid-1990s and remained an unresolved issue at the start of the 21st century. The Arab Maghreb Union, AMU, established in 1989, not only improved relations between the Maghreb states Algeria, Libya, Mauritania, Morocco, and Tunisia but also underscored the need for concerted policies. The AMU sought to bring the countries closer together by creating projects of shared interests. Initially there was some sense of enthusiasm regarding a project that included road and railway networks between these states. Tensions between member states, however, have substantially increased, and shared interest in carrying out joint projects has faltered. In August 2021 Algeria severed ties with Morocco amid tensions over Western Sahara and Morocco's increasing closeness to Israel. Relations with France have frequently been contentious. Disputes developed soon after independence over the Algerian expropriation of abandoned French property, 1963, and its nationalization of French petroleum interests, 1971. There were also problems with the Algerian migrants living and working in France, who consistently remained at the bottom of the economic scale and were subject to ethnic prejudice. After Algerian independence, France banned the importation of Algerian wine, deeming it competitive with its own production. In response, Boumediene uprooted and removed grapevines on large stretches of land. Throughout the 1980s, the renegotiation of natural gas prices constituted another source of disagreement between the two countries, although Algeria obtained some concessions. In the 1990s, the volatile political situation and violence in Algeria greatly affected the French, who suffered more casualties than any other nationality in the country. This terror reached Paris in the mid-1990s when Algerians set off a number of bombs in the city. Economic ties, however, have remained basically intact and include reciprocal investment agreements. Economic ties, however, remained basically intact and grew substantially in the first decade of the 21st century. Yet tensions over the two countries' shared history persisted. In 2012, French press. François Hollande took a step toward reconciliation by acknowledging that French colonial rule had caused Algerians to suffer, but he stopped short of giving the full apology sought by Algerian officials. As the role of the European Union, EU, widens, so does the link between Algeria and the member states in that organization. The Barcelona Conference Initiative in November 1995 established a Euro-Mediterranean partnership, bringing together the EU and the countries bordering the Mediterranean in North Africa, excluding Libya. The partnership sought to achieve political stability in the region, create a zone of shared prosperity through economic and financial cooperation, and establish a free trade zone early in the 21st century. There have also been specific European financial efforts directed toward Algeria to fund industrial restructuring and privatization. Algeria initially was reluctant to accept the intervention of the UN in 1997 to help deal with the civilian massacres. But eventually a high-level UN delegation was sent to Algeria in July 1998 to meet with various parties in an effort to put a halt to the violence, which had declined enough by mid-2000 that Algeria's borders with Tunisia and Morocco could be reopened. Thank you for watching this video.